2010, with war zones on two fronts and disasters, both man-made and natural, the U.S. government also made a brutal gangster a global priority.
Dozens of people now dead in Jamaica.
Do not go into the buildings, even if you're asked to come in.
It's like a war, it's like the Middle East.
We can't come out and buy food. We're hungry.
Kingston, a scene of desolation and destruction.
American might demanded a manhunt take place in Jamaica.
Christopher Coke, he was maybe the cruelest, most vicious criminal that there was.
Witnesses claim that they saw him actually killing people using a chainsaw to cut somebody in two.
Christopher Michael Coke, known on the streets of Kingston as Dudus, became an international target for U.S. drug enforcement agents. He was indicted for moving large shipments of marijuana and cocaine and weapons between Jamaica and the United States. For 2 decades, Dudus was the Don of Jamaica's most feared gang, the Shower Posse.
In Jamaican gang culture, shower posse means that a group of people take out their rivals by showering them with bullets. And that's how they got the name. They would actually go about, shooting up places, shooting wildly into crowds.
U.S. authorities say Coke and his army of Shower Posse soldiers developed a system for moving literally tons of narcotics into New York and Miami. Christopher Michael Coke was one of the most notorious gangsters ever to come out of Jamaica. Feared as well as revered, Dudus, the president of Tivoli Gardens, had 2 very different constituencies.
He didn't have an elected position, but he was an elder, if you will. He was a well-respected individual, somebody who could be called upon to resolve disputes.
Christopher Coke was essentially a professional criminal and a ruthless businessman who was interested in making a profit and running an organization in a very efficient manner.
Christopher Coke came into power in one of the poorest communities in Jamaica, Tivoli Gardens.
It became, by the 90s, a sort of criminal republic that was a no-police zone.
Police did not go in there. They were not policing inside that neighborhood because it was essentially self-policed.
This is the kingdom Christopher Coke inherited as the first garrison, Tivoli, became home to one of Jamaica's most powerful gangs.
The Shower Posse. In order to be a good gang, you had to have the source, the drug on your location. What did they have in Jamaica? A lot of ganja, as it was, part of the Rasta culture. The Shower Posse was primarily bringing in a lot of marijuana, ganja, the real McCoy from the islands.
The Shower Posse was formed by 2 men from Kingston, Vivian Blake and Jim Brown.
They did something unusual. They gave back to that garrison. They helped create schools. They helped to make sure that people had medical care. They became the Robin Hoods from an early time. And as a result, they built up a loyalty in the neighborhood that was remarkable for first-generation gang leaders.
People would protect them and defend them and speak well of them and do whatever it is that they were asked to do.
Under this arrangement, the Shower Posse flourished, both at home and abroad.
Coke had apparently good connections with Colombian suppliers who would transship the cocaine to Jamaica, where it would essentially be splintered into smaller shipments.
Jamaica is strategically set up because it's not far from Florida, it's not far from Colombia. A Jamaican fisherman can go to Colombia and come back overnight.
He was a Robin Hood, spreading his wealth to his kingdom in Tivoli Gardens. But the Prezi enjoyed wealth beyond his people's wildest dreams. He lived in a mansion in the hills and drove a Range Rover.
He basically ruled almost like a monarch.
If you were caught stealing in Tivoli Garden, you would get punished. So rape, molestation, there was zero tolerance for anything like that.
He was your quintessential benevolent despot. You ask him, what he did in Jamaica, he will tell you he was a community activist.
They loved him because if you weren't getting a job, you can go to Christopher Coke and he can make a contact and you would get a job. If you didn't have money to go to school and you went to Christopher Coke, he would give you money to go to school. If you didn't have food to feed your children, you'd go to him and he'd make it happen.
He became the kind of person that the politicians in Jamaica pursued, to say the least.
In 2007, Bruce Golding, head of the Jamaica Labour Party, became the 8th Prime Minister of the island nation. It's believed the president of Tivoli Gardens delivered the vote for his party.
Golding became Prime Minister and owed Christopher Coke. When you owe a gang leader for your election, the gang leader's in pretty good stead. The only thing that can go wrong is if the United States comes in and says to your country, extradite that guy, send him over to us. We want to prosecute him.
The US was very insistent. They would not back off.
Until recently, the government of Prime Minister Bruce Golding had been supported by the drug gangs protecting Christopher Coke.
That's the moment Christopher Coke can see the handwriting on the wall. When the Prime Minister says, okay, you can try to indict him. Just that, all hell breaks loose.
He had had these 9 months to prepare and essentially make Tivoli Gardens into a bit of a fortress.
May 27th, 2010. 9 months of political pressure by the U.S. State Department culminated in 3 days of chaotic bloodshed. In the end, 73 people were killed, but a gangster was still on the loose. The superpower would eventually get its man. Dudus Coke showed up 1 month later, looking nothing like his reputation.
He was dressed as a woman. He had on a wig and possibly makeup.
It was almost a comical scene, sort of looked like a matronly disguise.
I'm not sure what the intention there was and how he expected to, glide past security. Some sharp-eyed cop just recognized him and he was arrested.
We congratulate the Jamaican government on the arrest of Christopher Coke. We look forward to working with Jamaican authorities to bring Mr. Coke to justice in Manhattan Federal Court.
48 hours later, the Prezi of Tivoli Gardens was on his way to New York in shackles.
Christopher Coke goes into a federal court in Manhattan and pleads not guilty. Everybody in Jamaica, in Tivoli Gardens, where he's from that neighborhood, they are jubilant at that. There are news scenes of them celebrating because that's the Christopher Coke they came to believe in. The man who would go to America, not be bowed, and say not guilty.
He wasn't sure what they had on him exactly, so they said he was sitting in his cell listening to the hours and hours and hours of wiretap that his lawyer made him listen to.
Nearly a year after entering the initial plea, Coke's lawyers filed a motion to have the case dismissed.
They lost that motion, and all of a sudden, in 2011, much to everybody's great shock, especially in the garrison in Kingston, he goes into court and pleads guilty.
Dudus agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in return for reduced prison time. On June 8, 2012, Christopher Dudus Coke was given 23 years in federal prison, the maximum sentence allowed under the terms of his plea agreement.